All right. So I was thinking what I'm going to present today. So uh, I was reading some articles about design patterns recently, so I decided to share that. But specifically, I was looking into builder's pattern um, to see how we can incorporate that in our day-to-day routine. So today we'll be discussing that. Let me share my screen. Okay. Mm, Let me know when you can see the slides.
Yeah, you made the slides. Nice. Cool. We can
Yeah.
see the slides.
Okay. So design patterns. Basically, design patterns are something uh, that are basically best practices that you follow when developing or writing some code. Um these design pa- design patterns are supposed to help you in writing clean code which is readable and which is maintainable, and so that's what design patterns are. And why we use them? We basically use them to follow a simple routine. For example, by following simple set of structures or routines, you can eliminate common mistakes. Like, these patterns are well tested and tried by the entire community, so there is no chance that you can go wrong with them. So first of all, we use patterns to follow a routine. Then these patterns can help you improve your object oriented skills as well. So um, when I say these patterns allow you to improve your skills, I mean that by using multiple design patterns, because they are well tested and tried by the community, they always follow best practices. They basically forces you to follow best practices, which results in improving your skills. And the other benefit of using those is that you get to know how people are using uh, these patterns, how they are writing different libraries. So whenever you like go to some library or gem and start reading the code, you will notice that they follow a single pattern throughout the code. So these patterns will also help you understand those libraries and the code they written, and how they maintain that code. Following that structure, you can write your own like well structured code as well. And the other benefit would be sharing same vocabulary with the team. For example, you are working on a project like ours, and everybody in the team, if they know that we have to follow some patterns, the structure of the code will be quite regular, I would say, and everybody will be following same practices throughout the code. So it will be easier to understand by everybody. It will be easier to maintain, and if there is a bug, it will be easier to debug. And in the long run, it will also uh, help you innovate. So when you are using a tested and tried pattern, you like to think new features in that particular way. For example, if you are not following any pattern, you can design a database in a certain way. But when you are following some patterns, you can design the structure in tested and tried way, which is less error prone. So um, there are some downsides as well. For example, the potential concerns could be this requires some knowledge. So everybody in the team should have knowledge of how this pattern work, because the basic knowledge of the pattern can also limit your thinking. For example, you are limited to using some tools and some coding techniques in a certain way, so that can also limit your thinking. And so you have to every member of the team have to learn these concepts and these patterns so they can follow them and they can really create some innovative solutions. So one of the potential concern is sometimes they are not very useful for small projects. Uh, they can be overkill. For example, if we are creating a very small application or module, we can, if we force us ourselves to use the pattern, it might lead to more complexity than it can ease us. So these are possible concern that comes with using any design patterns. So um, there are multiple design patterns, excuse me, that are widely used. So there are builders, there are presenters, there are decorators, there are query objects, there are form objects, service objects, interceptors, interactors, sorry, value objects, observers, and policy objects. So there are many that are being used widely, especially the service objects. We use them a lot in our system as well. So but today we will be discussing builders. So um, builders builders are basically from creational design patterns. Creational patterns are those which are being used to create some things, create some objects, if I say it in a programmatic world. So by definition, the builder's pattern make the construction of complex objects gradual and straightforward. Here the complex word is bold because it has some importance. So these are widely used whenever you want to create complex objects in different smaller steps and following a specific pattern. So for example, if you have to imagine you have to build a robot which is quite complex, and there could be things like you need some internal structure, you need some body parts, you need some machinery, and excuse me. So you also need some intelligence, and there are a lot of stuff that goes into building some robot. So um, imagine this in form of programming or classes. So you have to write a very large class that can handle many inputs, such as um, how they will look, how what is the gender, what how intelligent they are, how they will consume memory. So in that particular case, you have um, a huge logic in a class that is responsible for creating a robot. So imagine this as a problem, and if we consider using builders, the solution would be to split the construction of an object into series of small and gradual steps. That how builders work. So the intention is to basically um, create a way or a platform which can divide creation of that particular object into smaller steps. um, Input from output from one step can be input for the other step, and eventually we have a full object. For example, look at this diagram. This is the factory for creating robots. If you look at step one, we have a simple input, and then gradually, as we move along the stages, we have a full-fledged robot at the end of this factory. So, in a nutshell, this is called builder pattern. So, the question is when we can use builder patterns. So, there are two important things to note. Whenever we need multiple forms of a single object, for example, in case of robots, we can create robots of multiple um, intelligence level, multiple gender with different names. So we need objects in multiple forms. So that could be one reason of using builders. And the other could be when we don't want to rely on constructors. So we don't want to create complex constructors. So I will show that in some programming examples next. But these are the two main things that leads us to using builders. Um, let's just jump onto some examples and see how they work. I have created these examples. Let me open this up. You guys can see the the editor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So in the example one, let me just. mm, this might be hard for uh, non-programming related persons in the meeting, but I'll try my best to explain this. So in example one, let me just copy this and put it over here. So let's imagine we are creating a user and we are passing a lot of parameters to the user object. Here, in this case, we are passing first name, last name, and then we are passing date of birth, then gender, then we are passing some roles and abilities, and then the status and emails and blah 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 anything. So in this particular case we can see that we have a really long constructor. If we go to the definition, it should be in plain user. So this is the definition of that user class. It has lot of parameters and um, a decent size constructor, I would say. It's not huge, but we will discuss that later. So in the initializer, there are two main problems. One is that there are too many parameters. Only sometimes there can be only one required, but all others are optional. But the other times, here in this example, every parameter is optional. But whenever we need to create an object of this class, we need to pass the parameters in this specific order. So we have to remember what we need to pass, and we also have to remember which order they need to go. So this could be an example, this where we can use builders. So uh, the, the fact that if it is useful to use a builder here is another question. I will discuss that later. So how we can use builder over here? For example, if I run this specific code, I can see we have this object created, right? Mm, la, la, la. Why it's taking too long? Okay, so we have this user object that has been created for us with first name, last name, birthday, and gender, all that stuff that we passed over here. So if we want to create a similar object, um, then it's quite difficult for us to remember, because when we are writing code, we need to pass inputs. So imagine I have all these parameter and I'm creating an object. I need to basically go into the definition and see what order I need to use to pass these parameters. Although the IDEs nowadays are quite intelligent, that will automatically show you what parameters needs to go. For example, you can see this ID is telling me to provide all these parameters. So if we don't consider that, but in general case, we need to remember these parameters. So we can basically solve this issue, the order issue and the default value issue. For example, if we have created user, if we want to create a user with only let's say name, which is Sujat Umar, and we only want email, so we have to pass basically these values like nil, 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 in all the places that we don't need, and eventually when we reach this parameter we will pass email. So we can't really miss the internal parameters until unless we make them default. So in our case I have made them default, but that's not something you can always do. So sorry about my background noises. So to make it use builder, we can do something like this. So in this example, I have created a user builder which is responsible of building this object in different stages. For example, I'm instead of writing everything in this constructor, I now have different methods that I can use. For example, builder.setName is only responsible for setting uh, name, and we can choose to use any of these, or we can basically, if we don't need, we can skip any of the stages. So what we are doing is we are splitting the creation of object and moving it from constructor to different stages, different smaller stages. So although it has increased the number of lines of code we need to write, but um, by a common person, if you can read this, it is pretty simple to understand. So it will make more sense as we will move towards like complex examples. For example, if I run this, we should have two similar objects with all the data we provided. First way, we had to remember all the order and how we are going to pass the stuff. Now we have like these two. This is the one created by builder, and this is the one created without builder. They are exactly the same objects, but in the second one, you can see we have divided the creation of object to multiple stages. So if I go to this user builder class, this should be under builder, and okay, so user builder has now a lot more code, which can be problematic for us because we always want to write some less code. Um, so all it is doing is creating a class method to which is responsible for building us a user's object. Then we have a bunch of methods that basically returns us the object with updated values. We can use one of these or all of these. That depends on how we want to create the object. So I won't go into much detail of how this is working, but the purpose of this is to understand if we need it or not. So in this specific example, I would say that we are better off without using builder, because in modern programming languages we can write code in such a way that it is way simpler and it is understandable. Let me show that in a second. So yeah, this particular example, we can also create this specific object without builder in a very clean way. For example, if I go to example one, and if you can see this specific line of code, and um, see, now we have this user model, which is basically and under this, and you can see we have this. Let me. This is the correct one. So we now only have these attribute accessors which describes what properties our user has. So we don't really need any constructor. Ruby will all automatically provide us with a default constructor with all the setters and getters. So this builder code can be reduced to this code. For example, in Ruby, we can always say user.new.tab, which will give us a new user object similar to what builder is doing. And then we can use this object to add multiple properties. These properties, I believe that other languages provide these kind of properties, getter setters, automatically as well, because in Java you have to write a lot of code to perform like simple stuff. But in modern Java, this is very simple as well. But in Ruby and JavaScript, you can basically create getters and setters with properties. Uh, if you look at this pattern is pretty similar to what Ruby is providing by default. So we can say, in a way, Ruby in the backend is using builder patterns, uh, but that's not very evident. But we can create the objects in similar way. We can do a bit better as well. For example, if I go to uh, example one, and this is the example I will show you. And let's just first run this one so we can see this in action. Okay, we have now third object with all the data we passed in, and all other values are nil because we only passed date of birth and first name and last name. So this is using pure Ruby without any patterns. So in this third example, we are again using simple plain Ruby without using any pattern, but now we are using key value pairs. So in this case, also we don't need to remember any order of arguments. So we can pass first name, last name, email in any order we like. If I go to this v2 object, v2 class of user, you can see I have this key value pairs. I have defined this in a such a way that first name and last name are required and everything else is optional. So to create this object, we only need to pass first name and last name. So these are all the ways we can create an object. So why we should consider looking into builders, because they aren't making our life easier. So if we simply stick to this example, we will be thinking that why we need this builder pattern. We can do we can solve all the issues, almost all the issues, by using simple classes and some object oriented programming. So uh, I would say, in a nutshell, patterns are basically using object-oriented concepts to make your life easier. Because using builder would make more sense if we move towards like a bit more complex example than creating a simple user object. Imagine you have to create an object that needs other objects in the process that are not really dependent on your input, but they need to be provided some way, maybe with some logic or stuff like that. For example, let's move to um, a little bit more practical example of using this. Let me just remove this stuff and run this again. So in example 2, let's say we need to upload a document. It can either be PDF, PNG, or any format that can exist. So we need to create that object. Each of these files requires a unique way of handling particular function. For example, in our case, we will be returning a string, and we can create a single class to handle all these formats that we need, or we can create some builder that is responsible for automatically handling this. For example, let's see this in action with, so if you notice that I have created a parser builder, and I am only passing file path to this object, and this build method will be responsible of returning me a specific object or specific output. For example, if I run this code, I will get blah blah blah. Okay, returning string from PDF parsers, because if you notice, I am passing a file with extension PDF. So if I jump to implementation of this parser, mm, parser builder. So in parser builder, I am using the path that it provides to dynamically know that what object I need to create. For example, if the extension of the path is PDF, I need to create a PDF file parser. Otherwise, if it is JPEG, I need to create a JPEG file object. So you can see the difference. If we create this in simple class, we need to handle all this logic in constructor, and the things become worse when we need to perform some validation on the object. So in the builder pattern, when this builder is basically responsible of creating objects of different kind with a simple input. All the things other than this input will be handled by builder parsers. So now we can easily create objects of different kinds. So that's one of the reason we use builder pattern. If I quickly jump into this PDF parsers, all for now it's only returning a string, and it is basically inheriting some stuff from base parsers. So base parsers have all the functionality that would be common in um, all the parsers, and every parser has its own implementation. So this is one good example of using builders to create objects easily. For example, I might have, so for example, if you will pass JPEG, it will return object of JPEG parser. And if you somehow send in an incorrect format that our builder cannot handle, we will receive an error. So that could be very beneficial as well. So hope it is making some sense why we need builders, where we can use builders. So from these two example, when we only need to create simpler objects, this builder pattern might not be very, it's essential to use, because nowadays programming languages um, can make our life easier. But when we are thinking of creating some complex objects, it could make sense to use builders, because in builders we can separate how we want to create the object and from constructor, and we can also apply some post validations. For example, uh, if we want to validate the path, if we want to do some post processing, I will show you some another example of to make it more clear. But as of now, these are two example I have created. So let me move back to presentation.
Yes, Sajad, any example that we can, that we can relate to the real world?
Um, I mean, this is the pretty good example of, um, as I have narrated already, that imagine you are creating a very complex object, for example, a car, and for a very basic car, you might need to get a lot of inputs from how much, like what should be the body structure, what should be the wheel size, how much fuel capacity we require. So to handle all that stuff in one go, and you might have to remember everything, and your constructor might be doing everything for you. So we can split that into multiple stages. For example, for a very basic car, you can create a builder, and then you can create methods inside builder that add additional responsibilities, additional features to that car. So a very basic example could be of that, as I have explained with robot example as well. So this will be more clear to you once I show you this particular example. Let me go back here um, and open this second link. So this was the article I shared in Slack channel. I'm not sure if you guys have gone through it, because I shared it quite late. Uh, so for example, we have to create a smartphone, and smartphone have multiple objects, like it has touch screen, it has CPU, it has RAM. So in this first example, that is the example very close to what I have shown with users object. So in this case, you need to remember order of all the things that you need to pass, and there are objects as well. So but if you create a builder for this, that is very close to the example of user that I showed you guys. I have created a builder, and then we can pass everything um, in this way. For example, smartphone builders, we can set model, add touch screen, add processors, add RAMs. So we have divided this we have divided the creation of smartphone object. For example, before it was this line that you need to remember how you are going to pass stuff into that constructor. Now you can basically write set model, set all these steps, smaller steps, if you need them. So this is very basic example, but it is not the valid use case for using builders, because all this stuff can be done with getters and setters. Although that will make the class complex than builder, but imagine that you need to perform some validations. Um, for example, you need to, if you don't create a builder, you can write these validations in a constructor, where you say if the model is empty, return raise some exception. If screen is empty, because every phone needs a screen, you can add validation in this way in a constructor. Which imagine if you have lots of input and data, this could go humongous. So to avoid this, you can always use builders. For example, one way is to you can add validations as a private method in that particular constructor. But again, um, this can lead to very complex logic in a single class. So what we can do is, in smartphone builder, you have multiple methods to add different features to a smartphone. So every method can have its own validation. This makes it way cleaner than it was before, and you can imagine how easy it would be to add more validation for a specific step. So for example, you need to um, check presence of operating system, and also you need to check um, if the OS is valid. You can add multiple validation against a single stage. So the other benefit of using builder would be you always get a valid object. In case of using only constructor to build complex object, you are not very sure if the object is quite valid. So in builder has a responsibility to provide you a valid object all the time with the build method. So in a nutshell, this is how builders work, and I think uh, these are very important things to have up the sleeve while writing the code. So if we can conclude this by saying that it really makes sense to use a builder. So when you need many permutation of an existing features in a class while creating new objects, which I have shown in the parser example, you need different objects based on different conditions. So in that case, builders are a good choice. And when you are looking to define an assembly for process for creating objects rather than relying on constructor alone. We have seen this in example 1 and 2, where we add features gradually to an object, like in example of a smartphone, in example of a user, where we were adding features gradually, not in a one go. So um, it will make sense when you have to perform some validations on the object. For example, some post processing on data after gathering all the data, and only return valid object if everything is correct. So for validation, it's very good to use. So one other reason of using builder pattern would be, if you notice in your current code, if you are using like similar pattern for creating objects in multiple places, you need to create, for example, to create some reservation, we need to create a user, we need to have a table, we need to have different stuff that need to be created before creating a reservation. So in that particular case, if we see we are using this pattern again and again, we are performing certain steps to create a reservation. So these steps can be simplified by using builders, and now builder can be reused throughout the code to create a reservation, which is responsible of creating all the prerequisites for us, and also all doing all the validations. So this is when we use builders. I think that's it. Anything? I hope that's clear.
Nice slides. And very nice language for non-technical people. Thank you. Great examples.
These kind of things are not very easy to explain when we have non-technical people.
I know, right? When
And
I was reading the article, I was like, I don't understand anything. But now, yeah,
so,
great picture. Thank you.
so any questions?
No, I think it was quite complete and detailed. And yeah, in this, I think I could say that I can understand the builder patterns and what could be the places that we can use it.
Yeah,
Nice.
great to hear that. We can explore more patterns in upcoming sessions as well.
Yeah, I love patterns.
Yeah, I would love to.
Yeah.
Okay, and the builder pattern is actually a part of a creational
Yeah.
design pattern.
Yeah, it is a creational pattern which is responsible of creating multiple objects. If we know all the patterns, we can mix and match and
Exactly.
create a beautiful work of art for
Application.
ourselves. Yeah.
Right. Yes. No question from my side.
Okay, that's great to hear. If
I got a
there-
question.
Yeah, sure.
Let's say you use the builder pattern. How do you prevent the user from forgetting one of the steps? For example, we create a builder pattern for creating a user, and we have the set 8 step with some validation. How do we prevent someone to create a user without calling the set 8 step?
Okay, so the main idea is you don't really have to remember how you pass the parameters to a constructor. For example, if you create a simple constructor without any optional argument, you need to follow an order in which you pass some input to that constructor. Imagine you have only one required parameter, and all the other things are optional. And if you need to pass something that is at the end of the constructor, you need to pass like many undefined or nil values before you reach that particular attribute. So that's one problem that this solves by allowing you to only run those stages that you need, despite of order they use. Although you have to look into the implementation to remember what you need to pass, but you don't need to remember in which order you need to evaluate or create a stage for creation of an object. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I guess.
One question from my side, Sajad, sorry. How you write test cases, I mean, to validate that you wrote that everything is working very good or
Okay,
fine.
so I have shown you this example. Let me share my screen again. Let me know when you can see it. So here, for example, if I have to write some unit test for this particular example, let me. There was an example of writing test cases. So, for example, here I am writing this mini test to create some smartphones. So here I have to create a new order. Then um, how many smartphone I need to iterate through every the number of times that I need to create a smartphone, and then I need to pass these values. So in our builder pattern, we can use same test case, but we can split that into multiple stages. So this is how we write tests in builder patterns. It's quite similar, but you don't really have to remember this line. You can
Oh,
always use.
okay. Okay,
So
okay.
that's how it is done. Any other questions? If there aren't any, let's conclude this. Back to Ayana.
Alrighty, so
Great job,
no last
boss.
question. Yeah. Then thank you so much, Sajad. It was very, very helpful, and looking forward to learn more other patterns. Be, I think, interesting to see what's the difference. So thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Sajad. It was